Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The alien girl never wanted to reproduce until she heard a human man's compliment. The first time Lyran announced she would never reproduce, she was 12 years old and halfway through stealing the high priest's ceremonial boots. The boots, gilded and pompous, squeaked in ways no footwear should, and when she clomped around the plaza wearing them, she raised her chin and shouted for everyone to hear. "If this is what adulthood looks like, you can keep it. I'll never birth a child into this madness." The crowd gasped, the priests fumed, and Lyran kept marching, the squeaks echoing like a war psalm. She meant it then, and she meant it later, when her scars came, when the whispers grew sharper, when the matchmakers tried to bribe her with shiny gemstones and smug smiles. She would not give her people another generation to chain down with ancient obligations. She laughed in their faces, then went home to tinker with discarded human gadgets that smelled faintly of engine grease and poor decisions. Her house, if you could call the crumbling ruin of an old relay tower a house, was littered with human scraps. A dented communicator that did nothing but play static. A helmet visor with a crack so wide it looked like a permanent scowl. A set of ration tins she stacked into a wobbling tower, just to see how high she could build before it collapsed. She loved the absurdity of it all. Humans, for all their arrogance, had a knack for building things that fell apart in hilarious ways. She could spend hours flicking buttons, laughing when lights blinked at random. Her neighbors called her eccentric, which was their polite way of saying weirdo with long ears and no sense of duty. Lyran embraced the label like armor. When the pressure became unbearable, when the elders started sniffing around, talking of fertility cycles and communal obligations, she would escape to the plasma fields. They stretched for kilometers, rivers of glowing energy that hissed and cracked in the air like an endless storm bottled inside invisible glass. Most people stayed far away, convinced that one misstep would fry their skin into crisp chips. Lyran, of course, brought snacks and made picnics. She liked to dangle her legs over the rocks and dare the plasma arcs to lick her boots. Sometimes she'd shout at the storms, telling them her problems, because storms didn't care whether she refused to carry on her species. They only roared back, beautiful and deadly, like the kind of friend she wanted but rarely found. The scars came one night, when the reactor vents in the lower city threatened to implode. Lyran, too young to be on the repair crew and too stubborn to stay behind, had crawled through the collapsing tunnels, hands blistered, lungs choking on metal dust. She remembered the searing pain of plasma leakage across her ribs and shoulder, a burn that should have killed her but didn't. She remembered laughing even as she screamed, half mad with pain, muttering, "So this is what cooked alien smells like." Her scars never healed into neat patterns. They spread like tangled constellations across her skin, jagged and uneven. To her people, they were imperfections, reminders that she was damaged goods. To Lyran, they were proof she had survived something spectacularly stupid. She flaunted them like trophies, making jokes about charging people admission to look at them. No one paid, but she still asked. Her parents, if they could be called that in a culture that believed individuals belonged more to the community than to bloodlines, despaired at her refusal. They tried every argument: honor, tradition, legacy. Lyran replied with mockery, "Oh yes, let me just chain myself to a crib while the plasma storms are out there singing my name. Sounds thrilling." When the matchmakers came with their lists of suitable candidates, she took one look at the names, snorted, and asked if they'd run out of imagination. "Half these guys sound like spare parts for an engine," she said. "Do you really expect me to partner with someone named Varn 47? At least give me a challenge." The matchmakers left in a huff, muttering about lost causes. Lyran blew them kisses. Yet beneath the jokes, there was an ache, though she'd never admit it out loud. In the quiet hours, when the storm settled and the city's hum turned into silence, she would catch herself, wondering why her defiance felt so heavy. It wasn't that she feared children. It was that she feared giving them to a world that felt like a prison dressed up in ceremonial robes. Better to laugh and rebel, to make herself untouchable, than to admit the loneliness clawing at her ribs. So she sharpened her humor into a blade, wielded it against anyone who got too close. She became the girl who mocked the sacred, who laughed at the serious, who stole boots just to watch priests sputter. It was easier that way. One afternoon, while she balanced on a pile of rusted human satellites, trying to see how far she could jump before the metal gave way, a group of children asked her why she refused. They were small, their ears not yet grown long, their eyes wide with curiosity. She considered telling them the truth, that the world was cruel and exhausting, and she wanted no part in feeding it. But instead she leaned down, grinned, and said, "Because if I did, you'd have even more competition for the best snacks, and I can't risk that." The children laughed until their sides hurt, and Lyran laughed with them, though her smile faltered when they ran off. She knew jokes could buy her time, but not forever. Every year, the pressure grew worse. The ceremonies grew louder, the whispers sharper. She resisted with laughter, with sarcasm, with pranks that made even her enemies choke back reluctant smiles. But in the end, she was alone. Alone with her scars, her scavenged toys, and her storms. She convinced herself that was enough, that it would always be enough. And perhaps it would have been, had a human soldier not wandered into her city, looked at the burns etched into her skin, and ruined everything with a single compliment. But that, she told herself, would come later. For now, she had plasma storms to yell at and another priest's ceremonial hat to steal. The humans arrived the way humans always seem to, loud, clumsy, and convinced the universe had been waiting just for them. Lyran was sitting on a rooftop, chewing on a strand of candied plasma, vines she had stolen from the market, when she saw the first of their transports stagger across the sky, like a drunk insect. It belched smoke, dipped far too low, then crash-landed behind the mineral ridges, with all the grace of a broken dish hurled at a wall. The sound rattled windows for kilometers. Children ran to rooftops to watch. Elders muttered about omens, and Lyran nearly fell over laughing. "Oh, stars," she said between snorts. "They've come to invade us with their finest pilots, blindfolded probably." The city council convened in panic, because that's what councils do. Priests declared it a sign from the cosmos, strategists talked of spies, and the local militia polished their weapons until the reflection of their own worried faces stared back at them. Lyran, naturally, strolled into the meeting hall, wearing one of the high priest's missing hats, tilted at an absurd angle. She leaned against the wall, munching on her candy vine, and said, "If they wanted to sneak in quietly, I'd say they've failed. Unless this is human camouflage, smash your ship into the ground so everyone thinks you're too pathetic to be dangerous." The elders glared, but even they couldn't deny the humor. Word spread quickly. Humans had landed. Some wanted them gone immediately. Others whispered of trade opportunities. And a few radicals dreamed of exploiting them for their own wars. Lyran just wanted to see them up close, if only to confirm her theories that humans were walking disasters in boots. It didn't take long. Patrols dragged a handful of survivors into the city, battered but alive. Their uniforms were scorched, their helmets dented, their pride somehow still intact. Lyran studied them from a distance, perched on a crumbling balcony, noting how their ears were stubby, their eyes a dull spectrum compared to varying crystalline hues. They looked heavier somehow, as if gravity clung to them more stubbornly. She grinned. "Cute little lumps of flesh," she murmured. "No wonder their ships fall out of the sky." The city swirled with unease. Traders haggled loudly over whether human tech was worth salvaging, while children dared each other to run close enough to poke the soldiers, and then sprint away. Lyran, bored of watching, dropped from her balcony and sauntered straight into the guarded courtyard where the humans were being held. She ignored the malicious protests, waved off the warnings, and crouched in front of the group with an exaggerated flourish, as if greeting royalty. "Welcome to Vera," she said brightly. "Population, too many priests, not enough snacks, and me. Congratulations on making the worst entrance in planetary history." The soldiers blinked, uncertain whether she was mocking them or welcoming them. Likely both. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scowl permanently etched into his face, grunted something about protocol. Another, thinner, muttered, "We're not here to amuse you." Lyran smirked. "You're failing at both invading and amusing then. Impressive balance of incompetence." She stood, brushed imaginary dust from her clothes, and turned to the guards. Feed them something before they collapse. Or don't. I hear humans can survive weeks on sheer stubbornness. That was when she noticed him. Not the loud ones, not the scowling officer, but a man sitting slightly apart from the rest. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, blood crusted around the edges of a wound, but his gaze was steady, not darting nervously like the others. He studied her in return, not with contempt, not with curiosity, but with something she couldn't place. She tilted her head, ears twitching slightly. "And what about you, quiet one? Planning to glare me into submission?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let his eyes trail, unashamed, to the jagged scars that twisted down her arm. Most people averted their gaze quickly, or stared with pity, or whispered. He did neither. He simply looked, then said in a low voice, "Scars mean you fought and survived. Makes you stronger, more beautiful." Lyran blinked. For a moment, her brain emptied of every sarcastic reply she had ever sharpened like a blade. Then she laughed a loud, disbelieving sound that echoed across the courtyard. "Oh, stars, you flatter terribly. Beautiful. They look like plasma storms tried to doodle on me after a bad night of drinking." She held out her arm for emphasis, the jagged burns catching the light. "You humans must have very strange beauty standards." But she couldn't quite shake the way his words hit. She tossed her head, pretending the warmth in her chest was just indigestion from too much candied vine. Still, her laughter sounded thinner than usual, almost nervous. She quickly covered it with another quip. "Tell me, soldier, do you compliment every alien that insults you? Or am I special?" The man Darius, she later learned, actually smiled, faint but real. "Maybe both," he said. The guards grew restless, ushering the humans toward containment quarters, muttering about interrogation and negotiations. Lyran stepped back, her grin firmly reaffixed. "Well, good luck surviving the council. They're less friendly than I am, and that's saying something. Don't let them bore you to death." As they were led away, she caught Darius glancing back once, and she quickly rolled her eyes at herself for noticing. She had spent her life resisting every push, mocking every tradition, laughing at every attempt to control her. And now, with 3 careless words, a human soldier had slipped past her defenses. That night, she sat on her rooftop, chewing another piece of plasma vine, staring at the distant glow of their crashed ship. The city buzzed with speculation, priests chanted warnings, and traders whispered of opportunities. Lyran ignored it all. Instead, she found herself tracing the scars on her arm with her fingers, muttering, "Stronger, more beautiful. Idiot." She threw her half-eaten candy vine into the storm and laughed too loudly, as though the universe might believe she still found everything funny. But when she finally lay back against the broken tiles, staring at the fractured auroras above, her smile lingered longer than her laughter. Lyran told herself it was nothing, just words. Humans were famous for tossing words around like confetti, loud speeches, clumsy flattery, endless declarations of glory. She was not going to unravel because one soldier decided her scars looked like artwork instead of debris. Absolutely not. She repeated this several times, while hanging upside down from the wreckage of an old orbital relay, fiddling with a piece of human tech she had stolen from the crash site. It was some kind of beacon, blinking at irregular intervals, like it was trying to send messages in a language only mosquitoes would understand. Lyran grinned at it. "If you're trying to confess your love to me too, I'm taken. One human soldier with bad taste is enough." Her people, however, had no interest in jokes. The council met daily now, arguing whether to imprison, trade with, or execute the humans. Traders pressed for bargaining rights, priests shouted about contamination, and militia leaders wanted to dissect every scrap of human tech. Lyran, bored out of her mind, slipped in and out of these meetings just to irritate them. She'd lounge across the council table, eating fruit that dripped sticky juice on sacred documents, then casually announce that humans probably weren't worth the effort. "They fall out of the sky without help," she said. "Let's just wait. Eventually they'll trip over their own boots and solve the problem themselves." The soldiers, meanwhile, were being kept in what passed for containment quarters, a set of old thermal vaults repurposed with locks and guards. Lyran had no business being there, which of course meant she visited often. She'd show up with snacks she pretended to smuggle, but actually stole from the council kitchens, toss them through the bars, and make jokes until the guards threatened to drag her away. Most of the humans didn't know what to make of her. Some glared, some ignored her. One even tried to lecture her on proper diplomatic conduct. Lyran nearly choked laughing at that. But Darius, the quiet one, was different. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did, his words weren't coated in pomp. He had a way of looking at her like she was less of a curiosity and more of a person. Infuriating. One evening, she found him sitting alone, fiddling with a small device that sparked occasionally, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to live or die. "Is that a weapon?" she asked, leaning against the bars. "Or are you just trying to electrocute yourself for fun?" "Communicator," he said without looking up. "Damaged. I'm trying to repair it." "Repair it?" Lyran snorted. "With what tools?" "Hope and positive thinking." She pulled a glowing crystal from her pocket and tossed it through the bars. "Here, this might help. Or it might explode. Either way, I win." Darius caught it, studied it, then gave the smallest smile. "You're impossible." "Thank you," she said, bowing dramatically. "Finally someone recognizes my talents." Their banter became routine. She teased him about human fragility. "Do you all really need to drink water every few hours? Or is that just you being dramatic?" And he teased her about her scavenging habits. "You're going to bury yourself under a pile of broken junk one day." The guards rolled their eyes, muttered about her corrupting influence, but they never stopped her visits. Maybe because the other soldiers, usually tense and suspicious, seemed calmer when she was there. Maybe because even the guards laughed, grudgingly, when she called them furniture with attitude. But it wasn't just humor. In quiet moments, when the jokes fell away, Lyran found herself saying things she never meant to share. She told him how her people pressed her to reproduce, how she mocked the ceremonies, how she feared being trapped in a life chosen for her. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer grand solutions, just listened. Sometimes he'd nod, sometimes he'd grunt softly, sometimes he'd say, "That sounds heavy." And strangely, that was enough. Once, he asked her why she never gave in, why she never let herself bend. She shrugged, trying to brush it off. "Because if I bend, they'll think I'm breakable. And I've worked very hard convincing everyone I'm unbreakable." She meant it as a joke, but her voice cracked, and he didn't laugh. He just met her eyes and said, "You don't need to prove that to me." Lyran immediately ruined the moment by grabbing the nearest piece of fruit, biting into it loudly, and declaring, "Fine, but I'll still charge admission to look at my scars." Darius chuckled, and the tension dissolved, but the words lingered in her chest long after she left. Rumors spread quickly. The alien rebel spending time with the human prisoner. Elders wrung their hands, muttering about corruption and betrayal. Matchmakers tooted louder than ever. Lyran responded by carving caricatures of them into the outer wall, giant ears and all, then scrawling underneath, "Professional meddlers, inquire within." She thought she was hilarious. The elders disagreed. Still, late at night, when the city was quiet and the auroras shimmered above, Lyran found herself lying awake, fingers tracing the lines of her scars, replaying his words. Stronger, more beautiful. He had said it without hesitation, without pity. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure her armor of humor was enough to protect her. When she caught herself daydreaming about what his hair would look like unhelmeted, or whether his laugh would sound different in open air instead of echoing in a vault, she smacked her forehead and groaned. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "Next thing you know, I'll be writing poetry. Someone stop me." She tossed an old communicator across the room, where it clattered and sparked in agreement. But despite her protests, she kept visiting. And though she always arrived with jokes on her tongue, she always left with silence pressing at her ribs. Something dangerous was stirring, something she had spent her entire life outrunning. The news broke like a cracked reactor vent, loud, smoking, and guaranteed to hurt someone. Human reinforcements had slipped into orbit, battered but determined, and they wanted their soldiers back. The Varen Council exploded into chaos. Some demanded immediate executions, others whispered about leveraging hostages for resources, and the priests droned on about divine punishment. Lyran sat in the back, yawning so loudly the echoes bounced off the crystalline ceiling. "I vote we throw them a welcome party," she announced. "Confuse them into surrendering. Humans can't handle too much kindness. It'll break their brains." The council ignored her, which was fine. She only said it to annoy them. What wasn't fine was the new curfew slapped across the city. Guards doubled their patrols, weapons charged, tension humming through the streets like a plasma storm waiting to break. Lyran watched it unfold with her usual blend of mockery and unease. "Wonderful," she muttered as she slipped past the checkpoints. "Now my late-night snack raids will count as high treason. At least I'll be executed with a full stomach." The humans in the vault were restless too. They knew something was coming. Darius, though, he stayed calm, repairing scraps of tech with his maddening patience, answering her jokes with that crooked half-smile that made her ears twitch in ways she didn't like to analyze. One evening, she found him tightening the straps of his scorched armor with deliberate care. "Planning to charge the council doors?" she asked. "Because if you are, give me a moment to grab popcorn." He shook his head. "Planning to survive." "Boring plan," she said, though her throat tightened. "If you survive, then what? Crawl back to orbit. Tell your people about the terrifying alien woman who wouldn't stop mocking you." He glanced at her scars, then at her eyes. "I tell them about someone who made me want to fight for more than orders." Lyran almost dropped the fruit she was juggling. She managed to cover it with laughter. "Oh no, you've caught feelings. That's the deadliest contagion humans bring. Quick, someone quarantine him." But her jokes sounded hollow, and the way he kept watching her made it worse. She escaped before her armor of sarcasm cracked completely. The pressure in the city grew unbearable. Patrols shadowed her every step. Whispers followed her through markets. Children giggled behind their hands, repeating the rumors. The rebel girl and the human soldier. Lyran responded by teaching them an obnoxious song about priests that echoed through the alleys for days. The elders were not amused. Neither were the priests. Lyran considered that a victory, but victories meant little when war loomed overhead. The human fleet in orbit demanded the release of their soldiers. The council refused. Talks broke down. Weapons powered up. The plasma storms above the city flared brighter, as if the world itself knew battle was coming. Lyran found herself torn in two directions, which she hated. She preferred being firmly against everything. But now her people wanted her loyalty, her compliance, her silence. And the humans, through Darius, had given her something she never expected. A reason to imagine a tomorrow she hadn't mocked into oblivion. The thought infuriated her. She stomped through the city muttering insults at both sides. Idiots, all of them. Maybe I should just run away and marry a plasma storm. At least storms don't demand commitment. When the first skirmish broke out in the mineral fields, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed her plasma blades, trophies she'd scavenged long ago, half-functional but still humming with deadly energy, and bolted toward the fight. She told herself she was only going to watch, maybe steal some tech while both sides were distracted. But when she spotted Darius pinned behind a collapsed energy conduit, firing wildly at advancing militia, her feet moved before her brain caught up. She landed beside him in a shower of sparks, slicing through the conduit's remains with her blade. "You're supposed to be surviving, remember? Not auditioning for a tragic ballad." Darius ducked, grim but alive. "You shouldn't be here." "Correct," she said, swinging her blade into another soldier's weapon. "I should be at home, eating candied vines and laughing at your people's tactical disasters. Yet here I am. You're welcome." The battle was chaos, Varens shouting battle chants, humans yelling coordinates, plasma storms overhead flaring so brightly it felt like the sky itself was cracking. Lyran fought with reckless joy, her laughter carrying over the noise. She made jokes mid-swing, teasing human soldiers for their clunky aim, mocking her own people for shouting too dramatically. Somewhere in the mess, she realized Darius was matching her rhythm. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough to keep them both alive. When the smoke cleared, neither side had won. Both were battered, both retreating to lick wounds. Lyran collapsed on a chunk of rubble, panting, her blade sizzling beside her. Darius sat nearby, equally exhausted. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lyran broke the silence. "Well, that was horrible. 10 out of 10. Would do again." Darius laughed, actually laughed, rough and unpolished but real. The sound made her chest ache. "You're insane," he said. "Yes," she agreed, leaning back against the broken wall. "And apparently contagious. You're smiling." The moment was fragile, the kind that cracked if held too tightly. But as the auroras shimmered above their battered city, Lyran felt something shift inside her. For the first time, the idea of a future didn't feel like a chain. It felt like rebellion of the best kind. A rebellion worth fighting for, maybe even worth building. She quickly ruined the thought by groaning and saying, "Great. Now I'm doomed. Next thing you know, I'll start imagining children. Someone please shoot me before that happens." Darius didn't answer. He just looked at her, steady and unflinching, and Lyran had to glance away before her ears betrayed her by turning bright crimson. The war ended the way most wars did, both sides too battered to claim victory, too stubborn to admit defeat. Smoke still hung over the ridges, ships limped in orbit, and the council tried to spin the chaos into divine strategy. Lyran, covered in dust and laughing at nothing in particular, decided the only real winners were the plasma storms, which had put on the most spectacular light show in centuries. 10 out of 10 ambience, she told a group of groaning militia being dragged past her. "Would recommend for your next festival." The council summoned her immediately, of course. They were furious about her fighting alongside humans, furious about her mocking their sacred chants mid-battle, furious about the caricature she had carved of them still glaring from the city wall. Lyran stood in the chamber, arms crossed, ears twitching with boredom. "Yes, yes," she said when they finished shouting. "I've ruined your ceremonies, corrupted your children, and possibly doomed us all. But on the bright side, I look fantastic doing it." The priest sputtered. The strategists muttered. The council leader rubbed his temples so hard Lyran feared he'd drill a hole in his skull. Before they could pronounce her punishment, the humans arrived, not with weapons drawn, but with Darius at the front, scars bandaged, voice steady. He asked for negotiations, not surrender. He offered shared patrols, not occupation. He spoke of rebuilding, of cooperation, of ending cycles of suspicion. Lyran expected the council to laugh him out of the chamber. Instead, after days of grumbling and posturing, they agreed, not because they trusted humans, but because neither side could afford another battle. For Lyran, it meant something else entirely. She found herself caught between worlds, belonging to neither, but tethered to both. Children followed her in the streets, begging for stories of the battle. Traders slipped her human gadgets to tinker with. Even the priest stopped calling her cursed, though one muttered she was dangerous in entirely new ways. Lyran preened at that, announcing she'd add it to her growing list of titles. Lyran the Unmarried, the Scarred, the Dangerous, and the Queen of Snacks. Yes, it has a nice ring. Her relationship with Darius, if she could call it that, unfolded in the strangest ways. He was patient where she was reckless, quiet where she was loud. He learned to dodge her pranks with increasing skill, though once she managed to glue his boots to the barracks floor, and he took it with maddening good humor. In return, he taught her human card games, which she immediately turned into drinking contests. He teased her about hoarding junk, and she teased him about humans needing so much water to function. They bickered constantly, laughed often, and in between those moments, something softer settled between them. The subject of children came up one evening as they sat on the roof of her crumbling tower, watching the auroras twist across the sky. Lyran had made a joke about adopting a plasma storm. Darius had countered, "Storms don't cuddle." She had smirked, ready with another quip, but then stopped. The silence stretched, and for once, she didn't fill it with laughter. She traced the scars on her arm, the ones he had once called beautiful, and said quietly, "I never wanted to bring anyone new into this world. Not until you made me think maybe the world could change." Darius didn't press her, didn't promise anything grand. He just reached for her hand, calloused and steady. And in that small gesture, she realized the rebellion she'd fought for all her life wasn't about refusing children. It was about refusing to be forced, to choose instead. And now, she finally wanted to choose. The council never fully understood her. They muttered about betrayal, about strange allegiances, but they couldn't deny that her bond with Darius had done what centuries of preaching never could. It had cracked the walls between their people. Slowly, cautiously, Varens and humans began to trade, to laugh, to argue without drawing blades. It was fragile, yes, but real. Lyran herself changed in ways that made even her laugh. She still mocked ceremonies, still stole snacks, still carved graffiti of priests. But her defiance was no longer lonely. It was playful, hopeful, stitched together with something she hadn't believed in before, the possibility of tomorrow. One night, as another storm flared above, she stood beside Darius on the same rooftop where she had once shouted her vows of refusal to the universe. She raised her arms dramatically and announced, "Fine, I admit it. I want a future. With you. With laughter. With chaos. And maybe, just maybe, with little long-eared humans who inherit the terrible sense of humor of their mother." Darius smirked. "That sounds terrifying." "Exactly," she said, grinning. "Perfect rebellion." And for the first time in her life, Lyran didn't laugh to cover the ache inside her. She laughed because joy, real and unguarded, had finally found her. The end.